Well, welcome everybody. Another Primitive Substance Pop podcast show, and another very special guest, the legendary New York engineer from the early '80s and with some fantastic records, Bob Blank. Bob, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
And so let's start from the beginning. How you got into New York and how you started all being an engineer and music.
Great. I was born in 1951. After I came back from Woodstock in that summer, I moved to New Mexico for a couple of years. And at that time, I was a budding guitarist, and I would be backing local, people on tour, things like that. I was in a band when I decided that I was really in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico at that time. I moved to New York. I was born and raised in Long Island, so it wasn't a big stretch to move to the city. So I moved to New York and I got a job on Music Row. Should I explain
Okay.
what Music Row is?
Oh yeah, with all the big stores.
48,
Manny's, Sam Ash, the whole row, right?
yeah. So 47th Street was Jewelry Row, and you had all the Hasidic guys walking around with millions of dollars worth of jewelry. On 48th, you had Music Row. You had all the, like you said, all the music stores and things. And there was a little recording studio on the second floor of one of those buildings,
Okay.
and it was called Sanders Recording Studio.
Oh,
Mr. Sanders had was an entrepreneur, and for many years he had his studio on 42nd Street, two lathes, and you go in there and you could make a record, and people would see you do it. He moved his studio onto Music Row, I guess, and I walked in there. It was a two-track studio, and this is end of 1971. And I walked in there. I got a job, and it was pretty interesting. One of our big clients there was Tiny Tim, who
oh
was
my gosh.
yeah, who's an artist in the 70s and the late 60s. And we would have either rabbis come in on a Saturday and bring in and make records for their budding bar mitzvah kids.
How about that?
And right, and then he would come in also on Saturday, Tiny Tim, and make little recordings to his girlfriends. So he'd be in there going, "This is for Miss Such and Such, and I'm going to play a song for you."
Oh, that's funny.
And he was actually a fabulous guy. One of the records that we actually made there was with an artist, and it was the record was called Susan B. He was an LGBTQ guy right before that was even happening.
Right.
And it's now a classic, but it was weird being in a little studio,
Oh, imagine.
6 microphones and a 2-track recorder, and cutting lathe. So I learned how to do all that. Story's almost over. We're almost to the late 70s. So
That's good.
after a couple of years of doing this and being in a band with Richie Ash when he was my age, when he was in his 20s, we came across the street. We made music. I wound up getting a job at Delta Recording Studio, which was a recording studio in the Palace Theater building in Manhattan. So this was 8-track, big deal. And we started working right at the beginning of the disco era, 73, 74, and recorded some, really underground stuff. And I was working with a producer named Bobby Marin, who produced a lot of music for United Artists, all the Latin artists. And he said, we should do a disco record. I said, okay. We wound up doing a disco version of a New York classic called To Be With You. It was originally done by Joe Cuba Sextet.
How about that?
Okay, and the singer on that was Jimmy Sabater, and it was a ballad, To Be With You, da 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 da, and It was a makeout record from the early '60s. So we got Chico Alvarez to arrange it, and I got my girlfriend at the time to do the backgrounds, and Jimmy Sabater sang it, and we made one of the first 12 inches and one of the first disco
How about
records.
that?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And what was really crazy about it, it was so new that this was a new idea that they would make 12-inch records for DJs, in the club scene. So they asked me, I'm the engineer, and Bobby said, how do we do this? What do I'm offered to cut it at 33 or 45. 45 will be more high quality. So it's a very weird thing. You have a 12-inch 45.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we made the record, and it got a lot of play and a lot of stuff. And so I'm in there making recordings. I worked with Eddie Palmieri on the first Latin Grammy-winning record. Worked with a lot of the Latin music, a lot of the New York funk stuff at the time. And one day my boss comes in and he says, this is really great, but you're burning the candle at both ends. We can't make records. The building closed at midnight every night because it was in the Palace Theater, So I would work during the day and we'd make, do what came in the door. And then at night, I'd produce records with people. He says, you can't really do that. It's getting a little crazy. There's too many people here. When you're 22, you stand up and go, yeah, I'll open my own studio.
There you go.
My own records. You'll see. And so I did that. I was living in the Village. I moved up to 20th Street. Between 6th and 5th, which was at the time the photography district. And there was a lot of loft space at that time there. Where the Limelight existed, that was the building next to it. So I got this loft for $250 a month.
Wow.
And started building a recording studio in it. We had when you buy a loft building, rent a loft space, they say build a suit, so they'll put up walls for you. So they put up a couple of walls. The room was 20 by 30. They built another door for a control room, and in the back, I lived. So, so at the same time I'm doing all this, I am really burning the candle at both ends because I'm also going out to New Jersey. To a little recording studio in Jersey City to engineer. And I'm a hot engineer at that time. And I met up with a bunch of guys. We were making some records. And I said, I'm opening a recording studio. And backtrack. The recording studio in New Jersey had in a corner were the parts for a Fairchild recording console.
Okay.
And so I bought the parts, which were the faders and some, and I brought them back to my loft, and I built a recording console with it. A friend of mine and I designed some preamps, and we had at the time what you could do, you could hire somebody to make cards. So we built cards for them. So anyway, I put together the console. 16-track console, and had the loft building. And the guys that I met, they decided that they would want to partner with me.
Oh, okay. Why not?
So this is a funny story. So building this recording studio, and I owned an electric piano. Well, you have to have a real piano to have a real recording studio. So the guys I went into business with, little did I know that they were also a great source for weed in New York.
Oh, about that.
So I don't know, I'm innocent. So we go to New York. Steinway Pianos has a big showroom called Steinway Hall. It's right down the block from Carnegie Hall, and on the roof of the Steinway building is an older recording studio, a famous recording studio, and downstairs is the place. We walk into this place, and there's a whole bunch of pianos. When I say, Steinways, these were like amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we had a friend who came in, he's playing them, which is what you do. At the end, we said, we'll take that one. It's an M. It's not a full-size grand because we couldn't fit it in the studio. And we said, so my guy says, we'll take it. And he pulls out a roll of 20s.
Right.
He's $6,000 in cash.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I'm so innocent. I'm thinking, on one hand, I'm thinking, I got the best partners in the
Yeah.
world. On the other hand, I'm also realizing I'm in bed with crazy people. So we get the piano, put it in the studio. Am I going too long on this thing? Is this?
No. Take your time. We got time.
Okay, good. Because it's very interesting. I'm building the studio at night, and I'm doing stuff. I'm out to Jersey during the day, engineering. $250 a month doesn't sound like much today, but I was only making $95 a month for a studio apartment in the West Village at the time. This was a big money thing. So we're building the studio, and we're doing our best. And all the clients from Delta Recording were calling me up. They heard about this and said, we have records we want to make. I said, great. I'm thinking, wait a minute, all I have is a 4-track. I had a 4-track half-inch machine, which I had rebuilt in this console. And I've been doing fine,
Right.
recordings and stuff. So my partner said, what do we need? I said, well, we need a 16-track machine. So I don't know how the money came, but all of a sudden one day we got a 16-track machine in there.
Oh, wow. Man.
So yeah, they were bankrolling it. I mean, I was, they were going to collect money from the studio, which was fine. So we have the 16-track, and I built this recording console. And it sounded really great. I mean, we bought the state-of-the-art MCI and had the recording console, and I set it up, and we started our first 16-track recording session. We're doing it, and it's really great. They come back the next night to start doing vocals. Notice that the vocal track has a combined mix of everything on the other tracks on it.
No.
I got to talk. So I built the console, but I didn't ground it correctly. So what was happening, there's a lot of crosstalk. Fix that. We start making records. Sounds really good. We start having hit Latin records out of there. And one day a guy comes in from a record store called Discomania, which is on 37th Street in Manhattan.
Okay.
And obviously the name implies it's disco. And he said, I want to make some records. So I was doing some records, this and that, and it was good. One day, I get a call from John Cale.
How about that? Wow.
So John Cale calls up. I mean, I know who John Cale is. This is great.
Yeah.
And John Cale says, I'm here. We have a record company called, we have a record company. You have a record company called Red. Anyway, had a record company.
Okay.
He and his publicist. And they had been approached by a guy named Michael Zilka to make a record for his girlfriend. And the record was a song written by a writer, and it was, as anybody knows about the Z Records world, it was sarcastic and ironic and crazy. So the song was called Disco Clone. I'm a disco clone.
Okay.
Right? John Cale producing. The arrangement was done by Ben Lanzarone. Ben Lanzarone's a really well-known wrote themes and music for television. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Laverne and Shirley, things like
Right.
that. So Ben Lanzarone makes this thing. John Cale's sitting there. He says, you know, what I have to do for money, you know?
Oh, that's funny.
So he makes this record, Disco Clone, and we're making the record. And, you know, what can you say? John, I have every one of your records, you know, and I really love, you know, I love the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, right.
He says, oh, you like this? Oh, great. Let me call Doug Yule. Doug Yule was one of the later people in the Velvet Underground. Doug Yule made his records, and Lou Reed starts showing up. So I'm working with these.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, and remember at that time, yeah, this was. I'll tell you how strange this is. At that time, if you were below 42nd Street, there was only one recording studio below 42nd Street in Manhattan at that time that was considered big time, and that was Electric Lady Recording Studio, which had originally been by Jimi Hendrix, and it became a heavy-duty rock studio. So all the other studios were on the west side of Manhattan, in the 40s on 10th Avenue and 11th Avenue, and big studio, you know, Columbia Records had their studio, all these studios, and we were below 42nd Street, and that was, you know,
that's something. I never knew that.
Yeah. Oh, about that.
Something.
Oh, yeah. So we had the studio, and they're making records there, and it's a small world between the people in the Velvet Underground and Michael, who was hanging at the Mud Club, and he was asking around, and there was I'm not too sure if Danceteria had been open at that time, but the Electric Circus was open, and another club that had live music. So we're doing all this stuff, and one day I got a call. Turns out there's a recording studio at the other end of my block called Sundragon Recording Studio. The name Sundragon because that's where the Talking Heads' first album was recorded. And he said, come on over, you know, we're buddies down the street. So I go over to the studio. My studio is 20 by 30 and a control room off the side. Their whole facility is 20 by 30, meaning the control room was 11 feet wide.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was amazing. And they had a console. They were really cool guys. The studio was like that big. And he said, we talked, and he said, you know, we get a lot of calls needing more space. And I said, great, you know, and at the same time, he had facilities that I didn't have. He had a synthesizer. So we started, you know, going back and forth. And so that was the scene. We were on this little street. I always joked that you could lie down in the middle of it at 6 o'clock and nothing would happen because it's the photography district. There was nothing going on around there. And we were working. So anyway, Michael Zilka calls up as we're making this record, and he comes in, and we meet, we became friends. One day he says, we're going to start a record label with my friend Michel Esteban, who was a guy on the scene, a great photographer and whatever. And I said, okay, great, cool. I said, we want to start making records. So he starts sending in some of the artists. And I have to tell you that as much as when I heard music like you made, I thought, oh my God, that is so cool. It's so sophisticated. It was so avant-garde and state-of-the-art, you know, the records you made. And I love that. And I was always hoping to work with people who saw the vision, but seriously, I also wanted these guys.
Right.
So I was hoping you would show up, but I just got weirder and weirder people. We got groups like DNA, and we got and
ESG was great.
Yeah, we got all that stuff. And so Z Records, Michelle's girlfriend was Lizzie Mercier de Clou. Uh, we, she was really a big fan of the Bush Tetras, on and on and on. So we started making records for Z. In the meantime, the studio is taking off. We're starting to do a lot of mainstream stuff. Really big time. No rock, but like disco. We did the theme for HBO, the big orchestra things, and we started getting a name for ourselves. But Z came in, and all of a sudden, I was surrounded by all this really interesting stuff, all this no wave stuff. One day he calls me and says, I want you to start producing for us. So I said, oh. I had produced, like I said, the disco records and doing stuff. For my first production project for them was Lydia Lunch, Queen of Siam.
Oh, that's a great record.
Yeah, which was why he asked me, because he said, no, we really want something really unusual. So we wanted it to sound like spy music, and she really wants to read poetry over jazz. Because I had worked with her on the album No New York, and I'd worked with her when she was recording Teenage Jesus. So anyway, I said, great. So we called Billy Verplank, who I'd been working with. He's a big band orchestrator, and he wrote the orchestration for the record. And of course, with Z Records, nothing was straight. We made this record, and it sounded like, this is going back in the past, like Peter Gunn and 50s jazz, nuts by 50s jazz, private eye music orchestration. Billy would come in with a chart, 30 stabs and all this music. So she read all her poetry, and she's really cool.
Oh yeah, that record's great.
Yeah. So just so you know, I'm 5'6" on a good day. She came up to here on me, and I don't know if you. She looks, massive, big person, but she's small. So she comes in and does this, and we're talking, and she says, this is really good, but it sounds it doesn't sound like something that would appeal to some of my fans. I said, what do you suggest? So she called Robert Fripp.
Oh, how about that? Of all people.
Played all crazy shit.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just interviewed Theo Travis, who's been playing with Robert Fripp.
Right.
So, all right, keep going. So great.
It was so fun. And so put that on. Michael calls up and says, we're done. It's finished. I said, what do you mean? He said, mix it. I love it. Meantime, he had written charts for full string orchestra. It was so funny. So anyway, made the record. He liked that, and I made a record called Spooks in Space, which was by a group called the Oral Exciters, which is basically me and everybody who showed up. Pat played guitar on it. James Chance played sax on it. I had all my everybody I knew on it, and we're doing this stuff. And so he says, this is really great. Keep an eye out, for things. I think, so I made some other disco-y records, but, what they call mutant disco.
Right.
So I'm working with an artist in the studio who was one of the leaders of Dr. Buzzard's Savannah Band. And they had won the Grammy. They had lost the Grammy, in 1976 to the group that did Afternoon Delight.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Right. But they had written this album called Cherchez la Femme, and it was brilliant. And there were two brothers. So August Darnell, who was one of the brothers, got signed to RCA Victor Records through Warren Schatz to make an album of a group called Geechee Dan. And he wrote all the music. And the record's now what we call a classic in that thing. But he's working on the album with me. I'm engineering it. And just to give you an idea, this guy just lost the Grammy in 1966, right? His record, Cherchez la Femme, is a classic in disco. And they had just performed in Europe or whatever. He was living in a pied-à-terre on 57th Street. He had a toilet. He did not have cooking facilities or a shower.
Gosh.
I happened to have a shower in my studio. He booked midnight to 8 so he could have a place to live.
Oh my gosh.
And making this record. And he was brilliant. And he still is brilliant because one day Michael Zilka came by and I was working on the album that we were working on, which is this. Well, you can't see it, but working on the first Kid Creole and the Coconuts album.
Oh wow!
And he didn't know it was going to be the first Kid Creole and the Coconuts album. It was just some music that August was writing and whatever. So he and August bonded like that, like this. And what we called the first Kid Creole and the Coconut album was some song demos recorded at Chapel Music. They had a 16-track recording studio in Chapel. And they brought the raw tapes over and we were working on it. And it's really charming. It's a charming record. It's really good. And Michael added his 2 cents. It sounded really good. And I actually met my wife on the photo shoot.
Wow.
We were all dressed in jungly costumes and everything. And she was on the back cover with a leopard skin tight leopard skin, bikini-ish type thing with bananas around her neck. She had, so anyway, so the whole thing. So they started their next album with at Blank Tapes, which became Tropical Gangsters, which in Europe and in America sold millions, and they started their career.
Wow,
he loved our August, and no kidding. So August started producing for Z Records.
Now, what about Larry Levan? I mean, he was another legend. You did work with him, right?
Yes. What happened was, funny story. I was working on an album with a group called Malo, which had they're known. One of the guys in there was Coca Escovita, which his daughter is the timbal player, who eventually wound up with Prince. So I'm doing Malo, and they said, we have to finish this album. We have to make it 24-track. So in the middle of the album, we bought the equipment, converted it to 24-track. Suddenly we have 24-track. And I had been approached by Salsoul Records out of Philly, actually out of North Jersey, but they had a lot of things going on in Philly, to let them know when we got 24-track, because they liked what I was doing with the dance music. They liked what I was doing, and they started bringing their DJs to do remixes. Walter Gibbons.
Pioneer.
Yeah, we did that music. My first album that I did, I had Tom Savarese remix. I was working with him. So we wound up becoming a really hot place to do remixes. And I started pulling back from, I still was producing, but I stopped doing so much just day-to-day engineering, you know. So not that there wasn't a lot of engineering being done, but I was doing like 15 hours a day of work. So Larry Levan was one of the people that originally came over through West End Records,
Oh,
which is another group. They had the Bombers, and we actually made a record for them with Tana Gardner, Work That Body, Heartbeat.
oh yeah. I heard that.
And West End was, I have to go back. So we had made Push Push in the Bush,
Oh yeah, that was a good hit.
right? And that's,
Oh, that was a classic.
there it is.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, so did that record and they really liked it. And so we were started working on a record for Sol Soul called I Got My Mind Made Up. And which was just going nowhere. We were working on it like crazy. We were working on everything on it. And it's over here. You can't see it. So working on Got My Mind Made Up. And one of the owners of Sol Soul says, we're going to call Larry Levan and have him come in. I met him. He's like a kid. He's like really young. Like, not that I'm old. I was like,
Right.
He was like 22. And he came in and we started working. And I think that was the first record that he had, the first gold record that he worked on. We mixed it. And we mixed it manually. Nowadays, everything's done in the box.
Right.
There was a time, I think this was in your time, when
Yes, it does.
Right. But
Everything was manually done.
Right. So, it was one of those things. You had the thing, you put a little China marker, that's where the
That's right.
and everything.
Piece of tape, and you marked it where it's going to be.
Yes. And you're all doing this stuff. And I was like pretty good at it. And, those, as you know, those were the days when you had a compressor or two compressors. It wasn't like
Right.
all this stuff. And once again, kudos to you, because your work sounds so amazing. And
Well, we did our last record at Radio City, had a studio.
Plaza.
Radio City Music Hall.
Yeah, Plaza Music.
Yeah, upstairs.
Yeah. Oh,
And we only had one day to do it. We didn't spend a lot of time. We did like a couple takes, and then the next day the overdubs, and that was it. And then Ed mixed it. Ed was really a key part of the, especially Cavern. He was a
and
genius.
Stacia? Yeah.
So that was we had to work fast.
That was an amazing studio.
It was.
We had little tiny studios, and that was a studio overlooking the rehearsal hall for Radio City, from what I remember. So it must have been gigantic in there, a big room. And but those were what you did was great.
I think they did radio shows there because we used a couple of the props. Like they had a door there that slammed, and we used a door to close, and there was a lot of props still there from, I think, the radio days.
Yeah, it's amazing how New York has so much history in everything.
I know, and especially that period. And you were part of it, and I was part of it, and we were so lucky that it was such a capsule in time that was so amazing. Now, you worked with Arthur Russell too, right?
Yes. Arthur showed up one day, and a lot of people were drawn to some of the artists, that he knew. He was the music director or whatever at the Kitchen.
Right.
Right.
I remember
So a
that.
lot of the artists that were recording, they were also there. Which is nuts, because if you ever met, did you ever meet Arthur? Do you know?
No.
Okay. Arthur, it was so ethereal, and he was, you think of somebody who's the music director, he's sitting over the phone, get me Lenny on Tuesday night and I'll pay him whatever.
Yeah.
This is not Arthur. He had a cello with a with a cutout of a bunny on it, and he came in wearing a hat made of a newspaper. He's just really cool. So I met Arthur, and we hit it off really well, and we started making things. What happened with Arthur was really funny. John Hammond, Senior at Columbia Records, took him under his wing. He had taken him, Bruce Springsteen, originally Aretha Franklin back in the early 60s. So Arthur was like his baby. And so he would sometimes send Arthur down to make some recordings. Arthur would get grant money. He'd call me up, say, I got $500 for, to make a record. What can we do? So I really enjoyed working with him. So I said, well, we'll make the record. So started working with him, and we did a lot of things together. In 1979, Steve DeQuisto from the Loft, which is is a disco, got a deal with West End Records to make a group record called Loose Joints, which was basically Arthur and his guys. And we made Loose Joints, and we made a record called "Is It All Over My Face?" And we made that record, and he had a aversion to success. Just to give you an idea, I made a record. He had a group. He was in a group called The Necessaries, which was, back in those days, some of the guys, Ernie Brooks was in it, Arthur, and we made this record, and it got some interest. So this is what I heard. They were driving to their first gig, and they were at the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel in traffic. And Arthur says, I'm out of here, and jumped out of the car and
oh my God,
quit the group that day. I know. It was cool.
Oh my, well, he never could do one style. I guess that's what really hurt him. I think he was doing experimental music, disco, this beautiful experimental music. So nobody could really peg him as a record label to really put him in some kind of niche like a Bruce Springsteen or any other artist. But he was a unique character.
He was unique, and he was a character.
And very talented.
Oh, absolutely. We made a record called Wax the Van, which had my wife at the time and my 6-year-old son on the record. And Arthur wrote this song, Wax the Van. And we made the record, and it was just great. He's just so creative. He would say, I'm thinking of another piano part. I said, okay, great. You can erase the one that's there. And he never did it. But I said, oh yeah, it's gone. And it would be better. It would always be better.
What a shame that he passed away so young. Well, before we go, let's talk about James Chance.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
That's all right. No, this has been great.
Talking all about history.
Oh, this has been great.
So James Siegfried came in the studio, and I first worked with him. He was playing on other people's records, and he recorded on my record, The Oral Exciters. And Michael said, he's got this new thing, James White and the Blacks, and we're going to make a record. So he came in, and we made James White and the Blacks, that Contort Yourself and all those things with Contortion.
Oh yeah, great songs.
Adele and the guys in the band, and the stuff sounded amazing. But he passed away recently. He was in really bad shape. There's no secret that he had a drug problem.
No.
And he was in the studio doing it. One day he says to me, and this is a guy, you can see when you look at the albums, he was like, he weighed 90 pounds and looked really crazy. He was wearing 50s hipster clothes, and he played this really beat up saxophone. So if you didn't know what was going on, it was all like making fun of 50s hipsters. The saxophone was a piece of shit, so was that. And he looked like a rocker. Turns out the saxophone was extremely rare and valuable sax from the 20s.
How about that?
A lot of guys who play woodwinds or brass sought that out, and yeah, it was all beat up. But it's like anything else. It's like a guitar with a ding in it. He's like, don't fix it. That's the cool.
Yeah, it sounds great.
And then he says to me, turns around one day out of the blue, he says, I can play legitimately. I said, and I didn't, what do you say? He starts playing this really cool John Coltrane-ish stuff, really excellently. He says, I play the music that I play out that people hear now comes from all inside my gut, and it's my version of rock and roll. I thought that was really profound.
Yeah, wow. I didn't know that saxophone was a rare piece because it sounds so great on the records.
Yes.
I mean, his playing was phenomenal.
Yeah,
that was really something.
But he could turn around. He could have done a jazz day like that, And so it was really sad following what was happening to him, and he just had a lot of medical problems. And I think it's so. I've worked with some other jazz artists, and that they don't age well. They're in a scene. The music that James made, as much as you and I appreciate it, and I don't know if it is for you, but for me, it's a big part of my musical heritage.
Right.
That kind of music. But to the average person, I remember somebody telling me a hit jazz record in the '60s, which is when jazz was really sold like 8,000 or 10,000 copies.
Wow.
So, they were all starving. And
yeah, I know. Sure.
I remember working with an artist named Chet Baker, who was a famous jazz trumpet player in the 50s. And he came in, and the musicians were like Bob Dorough and all the famous jazz drummers of the day. They're playing around him, and they're like, wow, this is so great. We're in the studio again. And I'm thinking, to me, these were the people that I would like. I'd put their album up on the wall, And,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love that Blue Note sound. But they never got what they deserved, and that's what happened with James.
Well, that's why I wanted to do this, because, I get a chance to talk to people like yourself. So what are you working on now? You have a Strut Records has put out a blank generation record?
That was a while ago. What happened was I sold the studio. I moved up to Connecticut, where I am now.
Right.
I started doing remixes. I worked with Chaka Khan and Phoebe Snow and everything back in those days in the early 90s. And then I moved away from music production, record production. I've always enjoyed dance. Believe it or not, I made all those dance records. I didn't know how to dance. And so now I'm studying dance. I competed internationally as a
How about that?
ballroom dancer and loving that. And I'm doing some writing and things, but right now just hanging out at home and enjoying not feeling pressure. Just to give you an example, I always played guitar on anything I produced. I'm not like you. I'm not a trained musician. I'm not, but I always was able to play. And after a while, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I didn't have guitars. A couple of years ago, I wound up saying, maybe I should, guitars are much better now. Back in the day, unless you had a Fender. But now you can pay $300 and get a great guitar. So I walked over to Sam Ash, believe it or not, and got myself the exact same look. This is a 70s, what they call CV
Right.
Vibe 70s Telecaster. And I sit here and just play and enjoy.
Oh, that's great.
I had to show this to somebody. Sorry.
All right, Bob. Well, I'm losing the sound here, but send me where we could find your information, and then I'll put it on the web and then on our YouTube site, and it'd be great.
Okay, great. I'll text it to you.
Thank you for being on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. To finally meet you in person. It's great.
I know, and you've been at a fantastic career, and you're a legend in this whole era, and you're important to be on. You're important to be on this, because this is what the show has been about, to reach out to people like yourself from that era, and it was such an important era. I want to get out to everybody, the people that were a part of it and who made it happen.
Thanks so much for having
So
me.
thank you again, and have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye. Take care.